All right, let's see if I can sort out some of my thoughts. Just thinking about how a couple of weeks ago I had this experience where I was sort of in bed and I was about to fall asleep, or was in the process of falling asleep, and I was paying attention to my body, paying attention to my sensations, and I noticed how my thoughts, like how I would go into these sort of thought fixations, but it was a little bit different on this occasion. It seemed like I wasn't as stuck with where my mind wanted to linger. So I was able to sort of recognize the sort of thought loop that I was in, realize that I didn't really have any real interest in pursuing that thought loop, and then I was able to sort of, like a bird, jump to a different branch and leave that thought loop completely, and be at peace with that, which is something, that you don't really notice so often, because, how heavily we are fixated on these stories that we tell ourselves, and how, it's like there's a fear that in letting go of the story, that we won't make progress on the things that we ruminate on. And so it's like that fear that keeps us from allowing ourselves to detach from the obligation to continue to re-irritate ourselves, essentially, sort of like continuously, pull the scab off of a wound right as it begins to heal. We sort of want to re-engage in that thought process, because it's like we have this fear that there's something, that if we don't perpetually think about it, we won't make any progress in that area. And that's sort of, I think that's one of the values of faith is, and sort of giving things over to God, is to, allow for the, come to the realization that there's, only so much that we're capable of achieving with anxious thought and worry about something, and that at a certain point it's better just to let go completely and give it over to to God's will, essentially. And so, but what I noticed is that there's some ways in which I didn't really have any real interest in the same way that I used to. I didn't have the same fixation on the things that I would ruminate about. Like, I wasn't as convinced by the narratives of my story that there was any yield in them that I wanted. It's sort of like I realized that I was addicted to a drug, and that this drug was no longer satisfying me in any way. So it's like whatever it was and that it was like completely illusory. That whatever was on the other side of the fulfillment, the perceived fulfillment of worrying about something in order to make it happen. It made me realize the thing that my mind wanted to, manifest through worrying about it wasn't really something that, I was as interested in as I led myself to believe with this perpetual state of worry about it. And, it's like, it's just like, and it's interesting, when you go from one worry and you're like, okay, now I'm worrying about this. And then you're like, okay, well, now I'm no longer worried about that. Then, your mind wants to go like to the next worry. And you realize, oh, now I'm doing the same thing, engaging in the same process. And still, it's like, what is it? Are my only options in this world, to worry about things, different things that somehow I'm not, there's no real reality on the end of that, string of this carrot that I'm chasing. There's not even really a carrot there. At least not in the way that, my imagination tries to persuade me that, the way that the carrot is there. Whatever the reality is, it's going to be something different than what my mind tries to make it into. And so, I realized then that I could let go. Like I was like done with the mind. It's like the mind is so tedious, and everything that it was like serving me up, I was like, kind of spitting out like an angry baby. It's like why is this mind feeding me this food that is not nourishing? Like, this food has no substance. And so my attention went off of my mind and more into, sort of like, it made me curious about what is actually generating these thoughts and these stories. And so I started paying more attention to, like, what does it feel like to think? Where are these feelings in me originating from that are generating these thoughts that I'm not interested in thinking? Because I figured, if I'm going to it's sort of like you need to find the source of your assailants. You need to figure out, where does your assailant live? If you're going to confront your assailant and come to some kind of, agreement that they no longer accost you. And so I was paying very close attention to where my thoughts, in my body were being generated. And in that, I became very quiet, and my mind became very still. But still, there was noise. And I could feel not thought itself, but sort of like the progenitor of thought. So it's sort of like there's like these little, signals that seem to be going off somewhere inside the region of my head, presumably inside my brain. And I could sort of feel, there were like little feelings arising within my brain just before a thought would happen. And so I was like watching my brain desperately trying to get me. So it's sort of like it throws out this feeling, and then like my response to it is like go into a thought and turn it into a story. And so, I saw very clearly just how much we as human beings are like, the original sort of drug that we're all addicted to is our own sort of narration that we use to contextualize the world. And it's sort of like we fear that if we don't understand, it's like the purpose of these stories, the purpose of the storytelling instinct seems to be that we fear without the story, we won't understand the context in which we will experience joy. And so we try to like remember like where we experience a certain type of joy or success, and in order to like repeat, in order to predict when that success will happen again, we try to create a narrative around why did that success happen the way it did. And it doesn't really matter if our information is accurate or our story is accurate. It just, like, this is what our mind does. It just automatically decides whatever is like standing next, like whatever room you were standing in, whatever people you were around, whatever fumes were in the air at the time of a certain experience that you wish to remember. Your mind sort of like associates everything that happened. And then it turns that into the story of this is why, this circumstance happened, even though, it might, the things that you have sort of wired together with that experience might be completely independent and have nothing to do at all, with what happened. It was just a circumstance, that they happen, these things that you were surrounded by, the things that you were surrounded by during a certain event in your life. But yeah, it's like we're always trying to tell these stories to ourselves, and we experience life through these stories. And it's almost like at a certain point we begin to stop experiencing life, and we just experience the stories, the stories which are like snapshots of things that have happened that we associate with trying to direct our life and try to control, the outcome of what it is that we desire, what it is that we wish to experience again. And so I think this is it's sort of a double-edged sword, because I think instinctively we desire to reinforce not only our positive stories, but our negative stories. Because instinctively, we understand that they're both stories, and they're both equally non-quantifiable, or not. There's a non-reality. They're equally non-real. They're equally unreal. But we fear of letting go of our negative stories because the mechanism through which we can disengage a story is we stop believing in it. We stop believing the story. And we instead allow ourselves to become present with what really is. And when we do that, not only does that entail letting go of our negative self-talk, it also it's the same mechanism. So whatever negative self-talk we let go of, we're also letting go of the things that we cherish the most, the stories that we cherish the most. Because what we cherish the most of the time, is contained not within the reality of something, but within the story of something. And so our positive stories are on the hook. They're on the same chopping. When we put our negative stories on the chopping block, we're putting our positive stories on the chopping block, because we have to acknowledge that no matter how nice the nice story is, it's equally just a story, and there's no real life in it anymore. That was like an experience that happened, and now it's gone, and the story of revolving around it is purely mostly fabricated. And so I think this is why people are so reluctant. This is why therapy, this is why human beings can make difficult patients in therapy, because in order to let go of their negative self-talk, they realize instinctively that their positive self-talk is at threat. Because their positive self-talk, it might not be as positive as they believe it to be in the end, because there's all these little there's these little hidden components that link our positive stories and our negative stories, because it's sort of like we're using the same framework to create both stories. And so for in order for a negative story to exist, we sort of use we use the same palette, we use the same brushes, we use the same colors. So in essence, the negative story is composed of the same fundamental devices that we use to create our positive stories. And our positive stories are only positive in the relative sense, in the sense that we believe that it will give something to us. We only believe something because we believe there's a certain yield to it, there's a purpose to it, something that is beneficial to us. But in reality, there's a certain neutrality within life itself. And so, it can be a very frightening thing to let go of negative self-talk, because, it kind of implicates not just our negative self-talk, but everything that we tell ourselves, positive or negative. And that perhaps, when we transcend this need for there to be a story, positive or negative, because it's not like we have negative stories for no reason either. It's like negative stories exist because we believe that they keep us safe in some way. We have to remember the negative in order to remain safe. At least this is what we believe. Often we believe it, and actually it's the negative story that ends up being the most, what creates the most harm and disasters in our lives. Because anytime when we're dealing with reality, not from experience and observation itself, we're going to make mistakes, because we're not really dealing with what is actually in front of us. So, in letting go of this need, in order for there to be a certain parameter around what success means, around what failure means, around what happiness means, around what you feel inside, as being in a category of this is a good feeling, this is a bad feeling, this is a painful feeling, this is a pleasant feeling. These are all stories, But if we can let go of that, this need to qualify the quality of what our experience is, then there's a certain inner peace where we can just be with with whatever actually is going on. And, it's not like the mind just stops doing what it, sort of is designed to do. But you'll become more aware that your mind is constantly creating stories, and you can become more, aware of this fact and realize that, hey, I can step back from these stories whenever I want to. I can take a break from whatever it is that is being generated in my mind. I don't have to agree with it, and I don't have to see this as somehow an extension of myself. I don't have to agree that this inner voice is like the primary component of what makes me me. What makes you you and what makes me me is something that's transcendental, that transcends what it is that is going on inside of this instinctive story generating mechanism. And so that gives us power, the power to step away and to be at peace, because in the absence of these stories that generate anxiety in us is peace. There's a peace with allowing whatever experience there is within you to wash over you and to become one with it, and to sort of be with it like a parent that does not need to interfere with a child, that is just happy to be there and watch its child sort of play with its, with its toys. So anyhow, I just wanted to, put this stuff into words that's been sort of floating around in my mind. Always feels good to, express what I have, going on inside of me, and try to be as factual as I can and descriptive as possible. Sort of frees me in a way, and it allows me to channel my energy. Anyhow, so yeah, this has been good, and I'll leave it here. You guys have a good one.